Joining me now is Congressman Joe Neguse, Democrat of Colorado, former impeachment manager and chair of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. I have a lot to ask you, Congressman, but the first is, what exactly is the point of expunging an impeachment?
I'm not quite sure, Alex. I think it's a great question for the extreme members of the House Republican caucus. From my understanding, every constitutional scholar that has looked at this has said there's no constitutional basis for the type of action that they apparently are going to try to pursue in the House. It's nonsensical. Of course, it can't erase the actions that were taken by the House following, of course, the president's conduct initially in 2019, and then again during, rather after the events of January 6th. The trial that followed in the Senate, which, of course, I and my other fellow managers participated in. The American public watched it. The Senate rendered a verdict, and it's, as I said, nonsensical for the Republicans to try to pursue this. But, of course, to the extent this is true, it's consistent with the way that Speaker McCarthy has conducted himself for the last 7.5 months since he first ascended to the speakership, constantly capitulating to this extreme right-wing part of his caucus that has clearly taken hold and kind of permeated the entire House Republican conference. Well,
and placating the guy at the top of that extreme wing, which is Donald Trump, right? This is all an exercise in placating an irascible sort of individual who doesn't like the fact that he was impeached. I got to ask, I mean, there's this sort of reason McCarthy is doing this, which is for Trump, but there's the reality of what this does to his caucus. Resurfacing impeachment does not seem like good politics, and to ask members to take this vote seems equally perilous. I mean, I think there are only 2 Republicans left in the House Republican Conference who voted for impeachment the first time. They had a very tight rope to walk, and to do this to them again and to other moderate members seems almost suicidal for a man who holds the gavel by 5 votes.
Yeah, look, I mean, it is, as I said, nonsensical from a political standpoint, legally and substantively. It is meritless. But at the end of the day, again, insofar as this is true, the reporting, clearly the speaker is focused on his own survival atop his caucus. And we have seen time and time again over the last 8 months a variety of different demands that have been made by the extreme right-wing members of his caucus in cohort with and in concert with former President Trump that the speaker continually capitulates to. We saw that with the Default on America Act, real consequences for American families. We now see that, of course, with respect to the supposed expungement, as they're calling it, of the 2 impeachments that the Congress proceeded with.
I do have to ask, though, generally in the context, when we talk about impeachment, we'll set Ukraine aside for the moment, but January 6th, right? We're on the precipice of Trump potentially being federally charged for his role in the events that day. And the House Republican leadership has been so cavalier about holding him accountable, has gone so far as to suggest all of the efforts of the Department of Justice are a political stunt. I wonder what it is like for you as someone who was an investigator, someone who worked on the impeachment in Congress, but also a victim that day. What it is like to watch the Speaker of the House of Representatives diminish what you did from a constitutional standpoint and diminish your experience as an individual who was part of an insurrection on the Capitol.
I mean, it's disheartening, it's frustrating, but at the same time, it's par for the course for the Republican leadership in the House that clearly chose long ago to choose party over country. We saw that in the days after January 6th. Not all Republicans, as you said, 10 Republicans in the House, 7 Republican senators who ultimately voted to convict in the United States Senate, notwithstanding that we didn't meet the constitutional standard for conviction, or rather the constitutional vote requirements for conviction at 2/3. At the end of the day, it was the most bipartisan vote for conviction in the history of presidential impeachments. And I'm reminded of what Mitch McConnell said on the Senate floor minutes after that trial had concluded. As you recall, he ultimately voted to acquit, but made clear that he believed former President Trump was morally and practically responsible for provoking the events of that day, and that he would not be, no former presidents ultimately are immune to criminal or civil liability for the actions that they have taken and the course of conduct during the course of their presidency. So, I'm not going to opine on, the investigation. Obviously, it's being done by the special counsel. It's premature for me to speculate, but I trust that the Department of Justice will do their work in an impartial, in an independent, objective way. I think it is deeply dangerous for Republicans to be attacking the FBI, the Department of Justice, the Office of Special Counsel. It undermines the rule of law, which is sacrosanct in the United States.
Well, and this is a man who was scared for his own life that day, right? Like the revisionism is staggering. And in the meantime, they're hauling Robert F. Kennedy Jr. up to the Hill to spout anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about the COVID-19 vaccine. I mean, we're talking about a cast of characters who Republicans have brought to the Hill as part of their weaponization of the federal government investigations. That is, I mean, laughable would be euphemistic. The leader Jeffries called them a malignant clown show. I mean, this is more than just ridiculous. It seems from the outside to be dangerous, and yet it doesn't seem like they're showing any signs of slowing down.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think these hearings are going nowhere fast. I do think that not all, but some of the Republicans certainly know why they are doing it, and it's a strategic reason, a judgment that they have made, that it is better to distract or to try to distract and obfuscate the American public from the dangerous public policy agenda that they're pursuing in the United States Congress, which is deeply unpopular with voters. You think about the work that they are trying to do to unwind the economic progress that President Biden and congressional Democrats made over the course of the last few years to grow the middle class, to lower costs. They don't want to talk about their plan to defund Social Security or to cut Medicare. So instead, they, fill the airwaves with incoherent hearings on outlandish conspiracy theories and, as the leader said, clown shows, political sideshows. I think the American public can tell the difference between congressional oversight, legitimate congressional oversight, and political sideshows, and I suspect that they are going to come to the conclusion that this is really the latter.
And you were generous enough not to mention the craven behavior of taking credit for infrastructure projects that they voted against that were passed largely by Democrats.
I'll talk about that next time.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, I mean, yes, you can. Please do. I didn't mean to sound sarcastic. Congressman Joe Neguse, thanks for your time. Thanks for coming.